Imagine a force so quiet, so still that it moves the mountains of resistance without raising a single hand. That force is not an action, it is silence. When a super empath withdraws, they are not retreating in fear, they are standing in the power of their own being, rooted in self-respect, aligned with their divine purpose. And in that sacred silence, the avoidant begins to stir, not because they are commanded to, but because your stillness becomes a mirror they cannot ignore. Every unspoken word, every boundary held with grace reflects the truth they have been hiding from themselves. Suddenly, the chase no longer exists. Suddenly, the illusion of control crumbles. Understand this, when you stop pouring your energy into someone else's avoidance, something remarkable happens. Your life becomes a beacon of authenticity, your inner world a fortress of self-love. And in that space, the avoidant awakens, not to guilt, not to pressure, but to the quiet realization of what they have been missing, the depth, the presence, and the love that cannot be commanded, only reflected. Silence is not emptiness. Silence is a declaration. It is the language of divine alignment. It teaches them, without a word, that they cannot fill the void you have chosen to protect. It whispers that intimacy is earned through respect, not through pursuit. And as they awaken, you are free. Free to be yourself, free to honor your essence, free to create a life where your energy is sacred and untouchable. So hold your silence like a crown. Hold it like a force of nature. In the stillness of your own soul, you are not waiting for them. You are calling them to awaken to the truth that only they can face. And when they do, it will not be because you chase them, but because you taught them the power of being fully seen, fully respected, and fully loved, starting with yourself. You are the storm they never saw coming, the calm they cannot resist, the light that illuminates their own hidden truths. And in that sacred exchange, you are no longer the seeker, you are the sovereign. Silence, when wielded with conscious intent, is not mere absence. It is a force that carries weight beyond words. For the super empath, choosing to step back is not an act of rejection or indifference. It is a declaration of self-respect and inner sovereignty. In a world where emotional energy is often freely given to those who may not appreciate it, withdrawing becomes a revolutionary act. It is the moment when the empath recognizes that their presence is not a tool to manipulate or fix, but a sacred extension of their own being, deserving of reverence. When this withdrawal occurs, it shifts the dynamic entirely, particularly in the dance with an avoidant personality. The avoidant, accustomed to eluding closeness, suddenly encounters a force that cannot be bargained with, pressured, or persuaded, silence that emanates from a place of strength rather than need. This kind of withdrawal is active, not passive. It is not simply stepping away physically or emotionally. It is holding space for oneself with unwavering clarity. It is the act of reclaiming energy that may have been lost in the cycles of chasing, appeasing, or overextending in an effort to maintain connection. The empath's quiet is laden with power because it communicates more than words ever could. It speaks of boundaries that are sacred, of self-worth that cannot be compromised, and of a life aligned with purpose rather than reaction. It communicates that love and attention are not commodities to be dispensed at whim, but are reflections of one's own inner abundance. For the avoidant, this kind of withdrawal triggers something deeply profound. They are confronted not with guilt or confrontation, but with the undeniable truth that they are no longer the center of someone else's emotional orbit. Avoidants often maintain distance because they fear losing autonomy or being engulfed by emotion. But when the empath steps back, that familiar dynamic is disrupted. There is no longer an external force chasing them, no pressure to respond or conform, no urgency demanding their presence. Instead, what arises is space, an empty yet charged space where reflection begins. The avoidant starts to sense the significance of what has been withheld and, paradoxically, feels drawn toward it precisely because it is unavailable. The withdrawal, silent and purposeful, becomes magnetic. This is why the power of withdrawal is transformative. It flips the traditional dynamic of pursuit and avoidance on its head. The empath, by choosing stillness, is not reacting to the avoidance behavior. They are creating a reality where their own energy and boundaries are prioritized. In doing so, they illuminate a truth that avoidance often resists acknowledging, that genuine connection is earned, not extracted. The absence of the empath's chasing energy forces a confrontation with desire, responsibility, and emotional presence that was previously avoided. Every day of silence strengthens the empath's position, not through manipulation, but through authenticity. Withdrawal also operates on a deeper, almost spiritual level. It demonstrates that love is not dependent on someone else's approval or engagement. It is a sacred energy that flows from self-awareness, patience, and alignment with one's own values. When the empath embodies this principle, their silence carries a resonance that cannot be ignored. It is the soundless echo of self-possession, a vibration that stirs the avoidance awareness without coercion. It is not punishment, it is a mirror reflecting what the avoidant has been evading: intimacy, vulnerability, and the presence of a soul fully anchored in itself. In essence, the power of withdrawal is the quiet revolution of the empathic soul. It is the moment when stillness becomes an instrument of transformation, not only for the avoidant, but for the empath themselves. Through conscious silence, the empath reclaims Sova. Ainti strengthens self-worth and sets a precedent that love is not measured by pursuit, but by integrity, presence, and the courage to honor oneself first. When a super empath chooses silence, it creates a unique and profound opportunity, not just for themselves, but for the avoidant who has been accustomed to their constant presence. This moment is not about punishment or manipulation. It is about allowing space for reflection to take the place of reaction. In the usual dynamic, the avoidant is skilled at evading emotions, running from intensity, and responding to others with distance or deflection. Their patterns are often fueled by fear, fear of being consumed, fear of vulnerability, or fear of losing autonomy. They are comfortable in a world of distraction, deflection, and control, where their emotions remain largely unexamined. But when the empath steps back, when the constant energy and emotional labor are withdrawn, the avoidant is suddenly confronted with a mirror they cannot escape. This mirror is not judgmental, it does not berate or shame, it simply exists, and in the stillness of absence, reflection begins. The avoidant is forced to face the reality they have been avoiding, the depth of connection they have been evading, the vulnerability they have resisted, and the longing that has quietly persisted beneath their defenses. Without the empath's reaction to their push and pull, there is nothing to distract them from themselves. The habitual patterns of flight know Onga provide a buffer, the external stimulus that they relied on to manage discomfort. The chasing, the worry, the overgiving is gone. In that emptiness, the avoidant begins to experience a rare and necessary confrontation with their own emotional truth. Reflection over reaction is a principle that extends far beyond relationships. It is a universal law of growth and awakening. When we are forced to stop reacting to others and begin reflecting on ourselves, clarity emerges. The avoidant, faced with silence, is given a chance to step into that clarity. The absence of pursuit is not a void, it is a fertile ground for insight. The avoidant may begin to recognize the ways in which they have avoided intimacy, the subtle ways they have sabotaged closeness, and the patterns that have kept them isolated. The stillness of the empath's presence, or rather the stillness of their withdrawal, becomes an invisible teacher, guiding the avoidant toward awareness without coercion, without argument, without debate. This process is delicate. It cannot be rushed or forced. The empath's silence is not designed to provoke guilt, anxiety, or panic. It is a deliberate act of honoring the natural unfolding of understanding. By stepping back, the empath demonstrates that love is not about control, pressure, or reaction. It is about presence, integrity, and alignment with one's own truth. The avoidant, confronted with this model of unwavering self-respect, begins to recognize the contrast between what has been offered and what they have chosen to avoid. This recognition is often uncomfortable, but it is necessary. It ignites the internal dialogue that the avoidant has long suppressed, the questions they have avoided asking themselves, and the feelings they have refused to acknowledge. Reflection over reaction also transforms the empath. It teaches them that their power lies not in chasing or correcting, but in creating space for awakening. It reinforces the principle that they are not responsible for another's avoidance, yet their presence or absence can inspire profound transformation. The empath learns that silence is not a loss, but a sacred instrument. It communicates boundaries, fosters respect, and allows the natural consequences of avoidance to reveal themselves. In this sacred interplay, something extraordinary occurs. The avoidant begins to experience the weight of their own choices, the distance they have maintained, and the love they have been resisting. Reflection takes root where reaction once dominated. And in that reflective space, the avoidant is no longer simply avoiding. They are awakening slowly, quietly, and inevitably to the truth of connection, presence, and the cost of their own avoidance. There is a subtle power in self-containment, a quiet magnetism that does not seek attention, but draws it naturally. For the super empath, cultivating this inner wholeness is not about arrogance or emotional withdrawal. It is about recognizing the sacredness of one's own energy and learning to exist fully within it. Self-containment is the ability to hold your emotional center without relying on external validation or the presence of others to define your worth. It is the art of being complete in yourself. And in that completeness lies a force that is impossible for an avoidant to ignore. The avoidant is conditioned to react to neediness, to chase or flee depending on the pressure they feel. But when confronted with someone who is whole and self-sufficient, the usual dynamics collapse. The chase no longer exists, the pressure is gone, and what remains is pure, undeniable attraction, the kind that comes from authenticity and inner mastery. This magnetism is not loud or forceful. It is not about showing or proving anything. It is about the silent confidence that arises when an empath aligns with their true self. Every word they speak, every action they take resonates from a place of integrity and purpose. Their attention is no longer a commodity to be earned or begged for. It is a gift that flows freely from a grounded, abundant inner world. For the avoidant, this creates a paradoxical effect. The harder they try to resist, the more compelling the energy becomes. Resistance meets presence, and avoidance meets unwavering self-possession. The empath's self-containment communicates an unspoken message. I am enough on my own, and yet I am here, fully present, unshaken, and unbound by fear. Avoidants are often drawn to what challenges them, what cannot be manipulated or controlled. The moment the empath steps into self-containment, they remove the familiar pattern of pursuit that the avoidant is used to. There is no drama, no pleading, no energy to be extracted. Instead, there is a quiet force, a consistency of being that both intrigues and unsettles the avoidant. This is the magnetism of self-containment. It is compelling precisely because it cannot be demanded or manufactured. It is earned by living in alignment with one's own inner truth, not by reacting to the avoidant's behaviors. Self-containment also embodies a deeper principle. It reflects mastery over one's own emotional landscape. The super empath who is self-contained does not lose themselves in the emotional turbulence of another. They do not bend, compromise, or sacrifice their inner peace to maintain connection. Instead, they model a form of love that is both generous and sovereign. This is magnetic because it contrasts sharply with the avoidant's habitual evasion. Where they have learned to distance themselves from vulnerability, self-containment shows that vulnerability can exist without chaos, that intimacy can be approached with groundedness rather than fear, and that love does not require surrendering one's own sense of self. The energy of self-containment transcends simple attraction. It is transformative. It teaches the avoidant, without words, that connection is not about control or manipulation. It shows that true intimacy arises when both individuals are whole within themselves. It ignites curiosity, desire, and respect because the avoidant recognizes, often subconsciously, that this is a force they cannot possess, but only participate in on equal footing. This energy challenges old patterns, encourages self-reflection, and awakens an awareness that has been dormant under layers of avoidance and self-protection. Ultimately, the magnetism of self-containment is a lesson in the power of being fully present with yourself. It demonstrates that your worth is inherent, your love is abundant, and your energy is sacred. When an empath embraces this principle, they become a living example of what it means to exist fully and authentically. And in this presence, the avoidant cannot help but feel drawn, not to manipulate, not to chase, but to awaken, to engage, and to face the magnetic force of someone who has mastered the art of holding themselves whole. One of the most powerful lessons in relationships is understanding the illusion of control, and nowhere is this more evident than in the dynamic between the super empath and the avoidant. The avoidant often operates under a belief that distance protects them, that independence shields them from vulnerability, and that they are the ones holding the power in emotional interactions. They may unconsciously manipulate space, timing, and attention to maintain a sense of authority over connection. Yet this perceived control is fragile, illusory, and entirely dependent on the reactions of others, particularly the empath who consistently gives, pursues, or accommodates. The moment the empath withdraws and ceases to play into this cycle, the illusion begins to dissolve. Suddenly, the avoidant is faced with a reality they cannot command, a presence they cannot influence, and a space they cannot fill by running or resisting. Control, by its very nature, requires energy from someone else. For the avoidant, that energy is the empath's attention, emotional labor, and responsiveness. They are accustomed to feeling safe in their distance because someone else compensates for the gaps, soothes the tension, and maintains the connection. But when the super empath chooses silence, the scaffolding that held the avoidant's sense of control disappears. Without the constant reassurance, pursuit, or accommodation, they are forced to confront their own feelings, desires, and fears without the safety net of manipulation. The illusion of authority is exposed because true power is not about avoidance or deflection. It is about presence, accountability, and emotional authenticity. The empath's silence works not as punishment, but as revelation. By refraining from reaction, they strip away the avoidant's ability to control outcomes. They do not chase, negotiate, or debate. They simply exist in alignment with their own values and boundaries. This teaches the avoidant, without a single word, that life, connection, and love cannot be forced, coerced, or managed through distance or deflection. When the empath removes themselves from the reactive cycle, it becomes impossible for the avoidant to maintain the illusion that they are in charge. The dynamic shifts, not because of confrontation, but because of unwavering presence and self-sovereignty. The dissolution of control is also transformative for the empath. It reinforces a profound truth. Your energy is sacred, and no one else's patterns or resistance can diminish it unless you allow it. By releasing the need to manage or influence the avoidant, the empath steps into a higher form of power, one that is rooted not in manipulation, persuasion, or expectation, but in self-alignment and conscious detachment. This is the power that awakens respect, curiosity, and introspection in the avoidant, because they are confronted with someone whose life is not contingent on their approval or engagement. Illusion of control is a prison for both parties. The avoidant believes they are free by avoiding closeness, but in reality, they are bound by fear, habit, and unconscious need. The empath, when constantly reacting, gives up sovereignty for the sake of connection. Silence and withdrawal break this cycle. The avoidant now faces their own inner truth, and the empath reclaims their power. In the absence of reaction, the avoidant's autonomy is tested, not as a threat, but as a mirror. They are compelled to recognize that no amount of avoidance can govern someone who has mastered the art of self-possession. In essence, the illusion of control is dismantled not through confrontation or argument, but through the quiet, unwavering practice of boundary, presence, and self-respect. The super empath, by refusing to chase, teaches the avoidant that connection is not about power games, manipulation, or evasion. True connection arises only when both individuals meet from a place of authenticity, responsibility, and inner freedom. And in that sacred revelation, the avoidant begins to awaken, not to guilt, but to the profound understanding that they are no longer in control, and that the greatest force in life is alignment with truth, not domination over another. When the super empath steps back and embraces silence, something remarkable begins to unfold within the avoidant, the awakening of longing. This is not mere desire or fleeting attraction. It is a deep, almost spiritual recognition of what has been absent and what has been taken for granted. Avoidants often live in a state of emotional self-protection, guarding themselves against vulnerability and intimacy. They are accustomed to keeping distance, controlling engagement, and deflecting emotional depth to preserve a sense of autonomy. Yet when the empath ceases the pursuit, when the constant flow of attention, validation, and emotional energy is withdrawn, a vacuum is created. And in that vacuum, the avoidant begins to feel what they have been avoiding, the subtle, persistent pull of connection that cannot be ignored. This longing is both gentle and profound. It is not provoked through manipulation or pressure, but arises naturally from absence. When the empath stops chasing, the avoidant is forced to confront the emotional landscape they have neglected. They begin to feel the weight of what has been given freely, the depth of patience and care that has never been contingent on their actions. In that quiet space, they sense the richness of presence they have consistently evaded. This is the awakening of longing, a recognition that real intimacy exists, that it is vibrant and alive, and that it has been held just beyond reach. Not as a prize to be won, but as a reflection of the empath's inner wholeness. Longing emerges not from fear or insecurity, but from awareness. The avoidant realizes that the connection they dismissed or ran from has intrinsic value, a quality that cannot be replicated by anyone else. It is the energy of someone who is fully anchored in themselves, someone whose love is abundant yet uncompromising, someone whose silence carries weight rather than emptiness. In that realization, the avoidant feels a pull toward authenticity, presence, and genuine engagement. They begin to see that avoidance has kept them from experiencing depth, and that the empath's withdrawal is not absence. It is a mirror reflecting what they are missing, the capacity for true intimacy, mutual respect, and emotional honesty. This awakening is a form of transformation. It challenges old patterns and dormant fears. The avoidant, confronted with absence, starts to examine their own behavior, their habitual deflections, and the ways they have resisted vulnerability. The longing that arises is not simply for the empath themselves. It is a longing for the emotional truth they represent, the ability to engage deeply without fear, to connect without losing self, and to love without manipulation. Silence, in this sense, becomes a catalyst for inner growth. It awakens an awareness that cannot be forced, but can only be felt, recognized, and eventually acted upon. The empath, by holding their boundaries and maintaining silence, embodies a sacred principle. That connection is not about pursuit, control, or conditional engagement, but about presence, integrity, and alignment. The avoidance awakening of longing is therefore not a product of coercion. It is the natural consequence of exposure to someone who has mastered the art of self-sovereignty. The absence teaches them the subtle truth that love, attention, and emotional energy are not infinite resources to be taken for granted. They are reflections of self-awareness, discernment, and personal alignment. In essence, the awakening of longing is the moment when the avoidant begins to recognize what they have been missing, not through external pressure, but through the empath's quiet mastery of self. It is a gentle yet profound call toward introspection, presence, and authenticity. It teaches that absence, when wielded with wisdom and intention, can illuminate the value of connection, the depth of care, and the magnetic pull of someone fully aligned with themselves. Longing, awakened in this way, becomes a bridge between avoidance and engagement, fear and vulnerability, distance and intimacy, a bridge that only the empath's conscious, sovereign silence can construct. Connection, like all things of true value, cannot be forced. It unfolds according to its own rhythm, its own law, and its own divine timing. For the super empath and the avoidant, this principle becomes profoundly evident when the empath steps back and chooses silence. Often we are tempted to chase, to accelerate outcomes, or to fill gaps with our own energy in hopes of forcing alignment. Yet the universe, in its wisdom, operates according to a rhythm far greater than our desire for immediacy. The act of withdrawing, of allowing space without interference, is an acknowledgement of this greater order, a surrender to the natural unfolding of events rather than an attempt to control or manipulate them. It is in this surrender that both the empath and the avoidant are called to meet the lessons of timing, patience, and alignment. Divine timing is not passive, it is an active form of trust. When the empath chooses stillness, they are demonstrating faith in the process of life itself. They understand that connection cannot be manufactured and that love that is rushed or coerced loses its vitality by holding space and honoring their own boundaries. The empath creates the conditions for authentic engagement to emerge naturally. The avoidant, who is accustomed to controlling distance or evading vulnerability, encounters a reality they cannot manipulate. The pressure that once drove them to flee or resist is gone. Instead, they face a quiet, powerful energy that invites them to align with the timing of their own growth and awareness. This divine rhythm is also a lesson in patience and observation. The empath's silence is not absence in the sense of withdrawal from life, it is presence in its highest form, anchored, centered, and fully aligned. Each day of quiet reinforces the principle that connection is not about force, but about readiness. The avoidant may struggle initially, feeling discomfort or uncertainty, but over time, the lack of chasing allows them to experience their own internal process. They begin to recognize their patterns, to confront their fears, and to understand the true value of engagement and intimacy. In this space, connection becomes inevitable, not because of external pressure, but because the conditions for genuine alignment have been established. Divine timing also emphasizes the interdependence of freedom and readiness. The empath respects both their own energy and the avoidant's autonomy, recognizing that transformation cannot be imposed. By allowing the avoidant to face their own emotions without interference, the empath is aligning with a universal law. Growth and awakening happen in their own moment, not ours. This respect for timing ensures that when engagement does occur, it is rooted in authenticity rather than fear or compulsion. It transforms the dynamic from one of pursuit and evasion into one of mutual presence, understanding, and reverence. Furthermore, divine timing reminds the empath of their sovereignty. By honoring the rhythm of connection, they cultivate inner patience, resilience, and clarity. They are not defined by the avoidant's responsiveness, nor are they diminished by absence. Instead, they become a living testament to the principle that love, respect, and energy must flow in accordance with alignment, not urgency. The avoidant, confronted with this unshakable presence, is invited into a mirror of their own readiness, learning that intimacy is not given to those who chase it recklessly, but to those who awaken in their own time. In this sacred interplay, silence, presence, and divine timing converge. The empath steps into alignment, the avoidant encounters their own awakening, and the universe orchestrates the conditions for authentic connection. It is a dance that cannot be forced, a rhythm that cannot be hurried, and a truth that cannot be denied. Connection, when it flows in harmony with divine timing, carries a depth, resonance, and permanence that cannot exist in rushed or forced interaction. It is the ultimate lesson in patience, trust, and alignment, a reminder that some forces are too vast to command, yet too profound to resist. There is a power in stillness that transcends action, a force that does not need to move mountains. For the super empath, stillness is not emptiness, nor is it passivity. It is an active form of empowerment, a conscious choice to reclaim energy, uphold boundaries, and exist fully within the integrity of one's own being. In a world where attention is often given, taken, or manipulated, stillness becomes revolutionary. It is the act of saying without words that your presence, energy, and love are sacred and cannot be extracted, negotiated, or devalued. In the interplay with an avoidant, this stillness carries a profound effect. It calls forth recognition, reflection, and transformation without needing to chase, plead, or persuade. Empowerment through stillness begins with self-possession. The super empath who embodies this principle has learned that their worth is inherent, that their energy is not a tool for influence, and that love given freely must be rooted in alignment, not desperation. By standing in their own center, the empath ceases to be reactive to the avoidant's distance, defense mechanisms, or attempts at contra. They no longer mirror the flight, the avoidance, or the inconsistency of the other person. Instead, they create a space that is unshakable, unyielding, and magnetic in its authenticity. This is the essence of empowerment, knowing that you are whole, knowing that your love is abundant, and knowing that your energy is untouchable unless given consciously. Stillness in this context is not silence as absence. It is silence as strength. Every unspoken word, every unmoved reaction carries meaning. The avoidant encounters this stillness and realizes, often subconsciously, that they cannot manipulate, chase, or evade it. What they once assumed they could control, the emotional energy of the empath, is no longer within their reach, and in that realization, a shift occurs. The avoidant is forced to confront themselves, their choices, and the depth of connection they have avoided. This is not punishment. It is a mirror, a gentle but undeniable force revealing truths that words alone cannot convey. Through stillness, the empath also cultivates discernment and clarity. They learn to distinguish between attachment and alignment, between desire and surrender, between action that serves growth and action that stems from fear. In every moment of stillness, they reclaim a piece of their power that may have been given away unconsciously in cycles of chasing or overgiving. They step into sovereignty, not through confrontation or control, but through the simple, profound act of being full. Why themselves? The avoidant, in turn, senses this power and is drawn, not to dominate, not to manipulate, but to recognize and reckon with a force they cannot command. This empowerment has a ripple effect. It transforms the empath's relationships, their self-perception, and their emotional boundaries. It reinforces the principle that presence, integrity, and alignment are more potent than any form of pursuit. It teaches that the true source of influence is not reaction, but centeredness, not neediness, but sovereignty, not chase, but stillness. In embodying this principle, the super empath becomes a living example of what it means to honor oneself, to uphold sacred energy, and to allow transformation to occur naturally in others. Ultimately, empowerment through stillness is a sacred practice. It is the quiet force that awakens without pressure the awareness and longing of the avoidant. It demonstrates that boundaries are not limitations but expressions of divine alignment. It proves that love given from wholeness is irresistible, transformative, and enduring. And in this sacred stillness, the super empath stands not as someone seeking validation or control, but as a sovereign being whose power emanates effortlessly from the depth of self-possession, inner clarity, and unwavering authenticity. Thank you for your time, energy, and trust. Wishing you clarity and strength on your journey ahead. Goodbye, and may your path be filled with peace, purpose, and endless growth.